Good morning, kiddos. I hope you're doing well. Today, we are going to learn how to create a line graph which shows change over time in Google Sheets. You're going to be amazed at how easy this is and how little work you actually have to do. It makes your science experiment presentations look much more professional, and plus it helps you see the data. So, this is what we're going to do. Notice a few things about my wonderful, here's my data table, and then right here is my graph. Notice a few things about this graph. It's got a title, it's got a scale of the side, it's got minor lines to help you see gradations within that scale, and then it's got the time intervals on the bottom. Remember, with this kind of graph, with the line graph, change over time happens, the time happens on the x-axis and the change is shown on the y-axis. So this is what we have to do to get started. It's really, really easy. You're going to like doing this. The first thing you're going to do is open up Google Sheets. So I'm going to hit File and a new spreadsheet. And I'm going to give my computer a second because it's run a little slow today. So eventually this spreadsheet will come up and you will be able to get it started. And the first thing you always should do is name your spreadsheets. Now for this one, guys, I would like you to name it your first initial, your last name, and then put heart rate change over time. All right, that's just to remind you that line graphs show change over time. So if we were talking about evolution, that's over a long period of time, we would show that in a line graph. Excuse me, in some way. Now, there are two things you have to remember. Row 1 is for your x-axis, all right? So whatever the title for your x-axis is going to have something to do with time. So I'm going to call mine time intervals measured in 1-minute increments. And that's a very long title. So let me think of what ways could I do that. Oh, I know what I could do. I can get rid of the word measured. I can get rid of the word in. I'm just going to say how I measured it. Minutes. Because remember, you want people to know you're not talking about change over hours. We're talking about change over minutes. So my time intervals, and then I have in parentheses minutes to help the viewer understand what time intervals I'm talking about. Now your second row and any rows below it are going to be for each trial. And this is the data. So the kind of data I measured was my heart rate. And I measured this in beats per minute. You can abbreviate that with BPM. But then I go back up to my first row, the time intervals. That's the first time I measured my heart rate, the second time, the third time, and the fourth time. That wasn't so hard. You put in a 1 for the first time, a 2, a 3, and a 4. You can handle that. Now, the first time I measured my heart rate was a resting heart rate. So the first time I did this, my resting heart rate was 62 beats per minute. That's pretty low. That's usually a sign that you're in fairly decent shape. It could be that I was just super still and I haven't moved for a while, but in general, a low resting heart rate is a sign of good health. So I have a 62 beats per minute. Now, remember, right here is where, on that line, is where I exercised for 1 minute. What was my heart rate? Immediately after I finished exercising, it was 132. So it jumped up a lot. Then I rested for another minute. That was this line right here where I rested. And then I measured my heart rate again, and it had gone down to 116 beats per minute. That's a pretty big drop in a minute. That means my body is recovering quickly. And then I measured again, and I was at 100 beats per minute. Super easy. I ran the same experiment. Remember, we run our experiments more than one time to make sure that we're getting data that makes sense and we don't have some weird outliers there. So the second time my resting heart rate was 70 beats per minute, a little bit higher. Maybe I didn't rest quite as long. Maybe I'm still recovering from some of that exercise. I don't know, but it was 70 beats per minute. Then I exercised for a minute and my heart rate went up to 128 beats per minute. I rested for a minute. I measured my heart rate again. I was at 110, so I'm still showing good recovery. And then I rested for another minute and I was at 94 beats per minute. I do it again. And so my third try, my starting heart rate was 68 beats per minute. Then I went up to 136 beats per minute. Maybe I exercised a lot harder that time. I don't know. Maybe my jumping jacks, I did more of them in a minute, but my heart rate did go up a little bit higher. And then it recovered, to 120 beats per minute after I'd rested for a minute. And then after I'd rested for another minute, it was at 106. So that's my time intervals, and then these are my 3 trials. Now what you're going to do is you're going to highlight all this data. Notice I got rows 1 through 4 and I came over to column E. Highlight all that data, go to the Insert tab, and then click Chart. And magic. There is your chart. Now, if your chart didn't come up as a line chart, go over here to Setup in the Chart Editor option. Go to Setup and choose Line Chart. It will suggest one for you. I could do a bar graph, but since I'm showing change over time, I'm probably going to show it with a line graph. So you choose that, and lo and behold, you have this. Now, I'm going to make some edits to this because I can do a better job. So I dragged it out so it's a little larger. And the first thing I want to do is I want to double check all my labels. First thing, my title came up kind of weird, so I double click on the title area so I can edit that. So instead of heart rate beats per minute, comma, and, which doesn't make sense, I'm going to use, oh look, heart rate change over time. Heart rate change over time after exercise, because I did exercise. So that's my title. Now, I want to pull this out a little bit. Here are my time intervals. And I'm not sure why this is there. That's not really where I want it. I'm going to have to go over here to Chart and Axis Titles. Here's my title. And let's see, where's my Axis Editor? Oh, I've got to click here. I'm going to click the vertical axis title. And I want to call that's going to be heart rate beats per minute, because you always tell them how you measured it. See how that changed that subtitle here? And then here I've got this correctly. So this is the first minute. That would be my resting heart rate. This is immediately after I exercised. This is after resting for a minute. And this is also after resting for another minute. Now there are a couple more things I want to do here. So I'm going to click back on this chart again. So the chart editor comes up. Now I want to put some grid lines in here. So this is what it should look like. Notice I'm not on Setup, I'm on Customize. So I click on grid lines and I want to put some minor grid lines in here. And the reason I want to do that is to help with these scales. It's hard to tell what data points these are in this graph because the scales here, these 50 points between these major grid lines, are kind of big. So I'm going to go down to minor grid line count and I'm going to choose 5 because I want you to count by 5s. Okay? So now, instead of knowing that this blue line is somewhere between 50 and 100 and closer to 50, you can go, oh, 55, somewhere near 60. It should be 62, so maybe this is a 10, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, somewhere right around there. Let's say I want to change that a little bit. Maybe I put in 6, 50, 55, 60, 65, 70, 75, 80. Ooh, nope. 85, 90, 95, 100, I want to put in 9. Grid lines between 50, 55, 60, 65, 70, 75, 80, 85, 90, 95, 100. Yes, okay, now I have my grid lines right. So you're going to want to choose grid lines, minor grid line count, and set that to 9, okay? That's important. Now there's one other thing I want to do to make this graph more useful for the viewer. I'm going to go up to, I think it's under series, yes, and I'm going to click on data labels. Notice how that puts in the numbers and it colors them according to which trial it was, because this is the trials, so that you can tell what happened each time. I could also get real fancy if I want to and put in what's called a trend line. What that trend line is shows that this, in general, my heart rate from the beginning to the end went up after exercise. But you guys, that's for like grown-up stats. So you don't have to use a trend line if you don't want to. And that, close off my chart editor. I can copy and paste this and put it into a doc and share my information with you once we communicate as scientists. But that's what you have to do to make a graph of your heart rate data. Super easy. So good luck, and I can't wait to see them. Thanks. Oh, Lord, how to turn that on.